I was on my way to the meeting about my husband's inheritance. As I got into my car, a stranger's warning exposed a family betrayal I never saw coming. Stay with me till the end, because what happened that day changed everything I thought I knew. My name is Zara Miller, and not long ago, I was still learning how to live without my husband, Daniel. He had been gone for only a few months, and each day felt heavy. The lawyer had called me in to discuss the details of Daniel's estate. I thought it would be a sad but straightforward meeting, one that would finally give me some clarity and maybe a little peace. I dressed neatly, trying to carry myself with strength even though my heart still ached. The morning was quiet as I stepped into the parking lot where my car was waiting. I held my keys tightly, rehearsing in my mind how I would face Daniel's family. His father, Howard, was always cold toward me, and Lydia, his mother, smiled often but never warmly. Derek, Daniel's younger brother, never hid his dislike for me either. Still, I told myself the meeting was just about legal matters, nothing personal. But as I reached for my car door, a voice stopped me. A man I had never seen before stepped out from behind a nearby vehicle. His clothes were plain, his eyes serious. "You need to be careful," he said quickly, almost in a whisper. "They're going to cut you out. Don't let them." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Excuse me?" I asked, not sure if I had heard him right. He looked around nervously, as if afraid of being seen. "Howard, Lydia, Derek, they don't plan to give you what Daniel left behind. They've already made moves. Don't trust them." His tone carried urgency, like someone warning a person about a fire about to spread. I gripped my purse tightly, my stomach twisting. "Who are you?" I demanded. But the man shook his head. "You'll see soon enough," he said, then walked quickly away, disappearing into the row of cars. For a long moment I stood there, unable to move. My hands trembled as I finally slid into the driver's seat. His words echoed in my ears. "They're going to cut you out." Could it be true? Daniel had always told me he wanted me to be safe, cared for, and respected. He had worked so hard, building his company, protecting our lake house, and making sure I never felt alone. Would his own family go against his wishes? The thought burned deep in my chest. Yet, as much as fear filled me, I refused to turn back. I started the car and pulled out of the lot, determined to face whatever waited for me at that lawyer's office. My world had already been shaken by loss. If betrayal was waiting on the other side of that meeting room, then I would face it head-on, even if it broke me. The attorney's office felt colder than I expected. The tall glass windows let in pale morning light, but it didn't warm the room. My footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as I entered, and there they were, Howard, Lydia, and Derek, already seated, their faces set in expressions I couldn't quite read. Howard, my father-in-law, sat upright, his posture rigid, as if the meeting was just another boardroom deal for him. Lydia gave me a faint smile, the kind that seemed polite but carried no warmth. Derek leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table, his lips curled into the slightest smirk. At the head of the table sat Grant Holden, the family's longtime attorney. His papers were neatly stacked in front of him, his glasses slipping down his nose as he avoided looking directly at me. I had expected this meeting to be about Daniel's wishes, about honoring the man I had loved and lost. But almost instantly, the atmosphere told me something was wrong. Howard cleared his throat and leaned forward. His voice was calm, but it carried authority, the kind that left no room for challenge. "Zara, I know this is difficult, but we've reviewed Daniel's estate, and the decision is simple. You'll be provided with a small monthly allowance to cover your needs. Derek will inherit the bulk of the estate, including the company's shares." The words hit me like ice water. A small monthly allowance. After everything Daniel and I had built together? After the late nights he spent building his business? The long talks we had about the lake property and what it meant to him? I glanced at Grant, hoping for some sign of reassurance. But he kept his head down, shuffling papers as if his work was suddenly too important to notice the confusion rising in me. Lydia reached across the table, placing her hand gently on Howard's arm, then turned her eyes to me. "It's what Daniel wanted, dear. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, without burdening you with complicated business matters." Her voice was soft, but it carried the same undertone of dismissal I had always felt from her. Derek chuckled under his breath, unable to hide his satisfaction. "It's better this way, Zara. You don't need to worry about running things you wouldn't understand. You'll be comfortable, and the family keeps control where it belongs." His smug grin made my stomach twist. I tried to steady my voice. "So Daniel left me with nothing but a stipend? That doesn't sound like him at all." For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker across Grant's face, guilt, maybe fear, but he quickly looked away. The silence that followed pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I knew then, deep inside, that something wasn't right. Daniel had trusted me with his dreams, with his heart. This picture they were painting didn't fit the man I knew. And as Derek leaned back, smiling as if he had already won, I promised myself I wouldn't let this end here. Something was hidden, and I would find it. The meeting ended with a silence that lingered in my chest long after I walked out of the attorney's office. My mind spun with questions, but one thought rose above the rest. I needed to see Daniel's will for myself. So before leaving, I turned to Grant Holden, who was still shuffling his papers as though they were shields he could hide behind. "Grant," I said, steadying my voice, "I'd like a copy of the will. I need to read it myself." He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the stack of documents. "You'll get the final paperwork later," he replied quickly, his eyes fixed on the desk instead of me. "There are still formalities." Formalities. The word felt like a brick in my stomach. Before I could respond, Derek leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Zara, don't stress yourself over legal details. Daniel didn't want you burdened with business matters. He wanted you taken care of. That's why things are arranged the way they are." The smirk on his face made me want to scream, but I bit my tongue. His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was insulting. I had been Daniel's partner in everything, not some fragile ornament to be tucked away with an allowance. Derek's words painted me as helpless, and I knew that wasn't how Daniel saw me. I walked out without another word, but the unease followed me home like a shadow. By the time I closed my front door, the weight of doubt pressed down hard. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from Howard, Lydia, or Derek. That much was clear. The house was quiet, filled with the faint scent of Daniel's cologne still clinging to the corners of our bedroom. I went to the closet, where boxes of his belongings were neatly stacked, untouched since the funeral. My hands trembled as I opened one, sifting through old notebooks, photographs, and letters. Each item brought back a memory, a whisper of his voice. Then, buried beneath a pile of receipts and drafts of business reports, I found it, a folded piece of paper with Daniel's handwriting on it. I recognized the slope of his letters instantly. My breath caught as I unfolded the note. It was simple, direct, and written with the same careful thought Daniel put into everything. "I want Zara to have full control of the lake property and my shares." I stared at the words until they blurred through my tears. This wasn't a vague promise of taking care of me. This was trust, respect, and certainty. He had wanted me to inherit not just a piece of his estate, but the parts that mattered most. The note didn't match what I heard at the meeting. Not even close. A chill ran through me, sharper than grief, heavier than doubt. Someone had twisted Daniel's wishes. Someone had lied. And now I was certain. I wasn't imagining things. Something was terribly wrong. I didn't wait long before confronting them. The note in Daniel's handwriting weighed heavily in my pocket as I drove to the miller's estate. I needed answers, and this time, I wasn't going to let them deflect or silence me. Howard opened the door, his expression already stern, as if he had been expecting a fight. Lydia followed behind him, smoothing her sweater with nervous hands, while Derek leaned lazily against the staircase rail, smirking the moment he saw me. "I need to talk to you," I said firmly, stepping inside before they could turn me away. I pulled out the folded note and placed it on the coffee table. Daniel wrote this. He wanted me to have control of the lake property and his shares. That's not what I was told at the meeting. Howard's jaw tightened as he picked up the paper, glancing at it for only a second before tossing it back onto the table. His voice was cold, almost dismissive. "That company and that land belong to this family, not to you. Daniel may have written notes, but what matters is the final will, not scraps of paper." His words sliced through me, not just because of what he said, but how he said it. There was no compassion, no respect, only ownership and control. Lydia moved closer, placing a hand gently on my arm. Her eyes softened as if she wanted to soothe the sting of Howard's cruelty. "Zara, darling, you have to understand. Daniel was uncertain about how to arrange things. I even saw one of his draft wills before he passed, and it didn't look anything like what you're holding." The room froze. Lydia seemed to realize too late what she had just admitted. I caught it instantly. She had seen his draft will. How would she have access to that unless she had been involved long before his death? Before I could press her, Derek let out a sharp laugh. "Come on, Zara. If Daniel really trusted you with all of that, you'd already know what's in the real will. You wouldn't be chasing notes around like some desperate widow. His grin widened, every word meant to belittle me. I clenched my fists, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. Their act was unraveling piece by piece. Howard's coldness, Lydia's slip, Derek's mockery, it all pointed to the same truth. They weren't just keeping me in the dark. They had deliberately pushed me out. I stood there, looking at the three of them, the family that had once welcomed me with smiles but now showed their true faces. They weren't protecting Daniel's legacy. They were stealing it. The betrayal burned deeper than grief. They hadn't just shut me out of the estate, they had erased the trust Daniel placed in me. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't rely on their version of the truth anymore. If I wanted justice for Daniel, I would have to find it myself. The days after confronting the Millers left me restless and heavy with anger. Every corner of the house reminded me of Daniel, but now those memories carried a new weight. His family had betrayed him, and me. I paced the living room late into the evening, replaying Lydia's slip, Derek's mocking words, and Howard's chilling dismissal. My instincts screamed that they had buried the truth. One afternoon, as I left the grocery store, I noticed someone leaning against a car a few rows down. At first, I thought he was just another passerby, but then I recognized him. The same man who had stopped me before my meeting at the lawyer's office. His eyes caught mine, serious and steady, as if he had been waiting for me. I hesitated, but he stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller," he said quietly, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "My name is Caleb Rowe. I used to work for Howard's firm." The name was unfamiliar, but the way he spoke told me he wasn't here by accident. "You warned me once," I said cautiously. "Why? And why should I trust you?" Caleb sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I saw what they did. I was there." Howard and Derek pressured Grant Holden into rewriting Daniel's will. Grant didn't want to do it, but they cornered him, bribed him, threatened him. He caved. "The will they read to you isn't the one Daniel signed." My heart pounded, each word hitting harder than the last. "And you know this for certain?" I asked, my voice shaking between hope and fear. "Yes," Caleb replied firmly. "Daniel left you more than an allowance. He wanted you to inherit the lake house and his controlling shares of the company. That was his decision, and it scared Howard. He didn't want you to have that kind of power." The world tilted for a moment, and I gripped the handle of my grocery bag to steady myself. Everything I suspected was true. Daniel had trusted me, and his family had stolen that trust right out of my hands. I studied Caleb's face. He didn't look smug or greedy. If anything, he looked tired, like a man carrying too many secrets. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. "Because Daniel deserved better," he said without hesitation. "And because I don't owe Howard anything anymore. What they did to you, it's wrong. And I know where Daniel kept duplicate documents, in case something like this ever happened." My breath caught. "Duplicates?" Caleb nodded. He was careful. He didn't trust Howard completely, not toward the end. "If you're willing, I can take you there. You'll see for yourself." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope sparked inside me. Maybe I wasn't fighting shadows after all. Maybe Daniel had left me a way to uncover the truth. I looked Caleb in the eye and whispered, "Show me." The next morning, Caleb met me outside a small storage facility on the edge of town. The place looked ordinary enough, rows of metal doors, numbers painted in fading white. But my heart thudded in my chest as if something extraordinary was waiting behind one of them. Caleb carried a key ring, his hands steady, though his eyes flicked around as though he feared someone had followed us. "This is it," he said quietly, stopping at Unit 34. The lock clicked open, and with a groan, the door lifted. A cool draft swept out, carrying the faint scent of paper and dust. Inside, the unit was packed neatly, not with random clutter, but with boxes labeled in Daniel's careful handwriting. My breath caught as I stepped closer. His handwriting alone was enough to bring back the sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence. For a moment, it felt like walking into a part of him I thought I had lost. Caleb pulled one of the boxes down and set it on the floor. "Daniel trusted you more than anyone. That's why he kept these here, away from his family. He knew they'd interfere if they could." I knelt beside the box and lifted the lid. Inside were leather-bound journals, their pages filled with Daniel's thoughts and plans. Some entries spoke of the company, others of the lake property and what it meant to him. Beneath the journals were stacks of financial ledgers, all organized, all pointing to years of careful work. And then I saw it, a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in bold, familiar strokes. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a copy of Daniel's original will. My eyes skimmed the pages, my heart racing faster with every line. There it was in black and white. Daniel had named me as the primary heir. The lake house was mine. The controlling shares of his company were mine. Everything he had worked for, everything that mattered most to him, he had entrusted to me. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. The weight of it was overwhelming. Not just the inheritance, but the faith he had placed in me. Daniel had believed in my strength, my ability to carry on his legacy. He hadn't seen me as someone to take care of, like his family insisted. He had seen me as his partner, his equal. But they had stolen that truth from me. Howard, Lydia, Derek, they had twisted it, buried it, and tried to erase me from Daniel's story. The pain of that betrayal cut deep, but in that moment, sitting on the cold floor of the storage unit, I also felt something stronger rising inside me. I clutched the will to my chest, whispering through tears, "Thank you, Daniel. I'll make this right." And for the first time since his death, I felt him with me, not in grief, but in resolve. I asked Grant Holden to meet me at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the Miller family's watchful eyes. He agreed, though his voice on the phone had carried a nervous tremor, as if he already suspected the reason I wanted to see him. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a booth in the corner, setting my purse beside me with the recorder hidden inside. A few minutes later, Grant walked in, adjusting his tie even though he wasn't in court. He looked smaller than he had in his office, stripped of the authority that came with polished desks and legal files. "Zara," he greeted, sliding into the seat across from me. "What's this about?" I didn't waste time. From my bag, I pulled out the envelope and laid Daniel's original will on the table. The sight of it made his face pale instantly. "This," I said firmly. "This is what Daniel wanted. Not the lies you read out in your office." Grant's hands twitched, his eyes darting around the cafe as though someone might overhear. How did you get that?" he stammered. "That doesn't matter," I replied. My voice was sharper than I expected, fueled by weeks of betrayal. "What matters is why you let Howard and Derek change it. Why you betrayed Daniel's wishes." For a long moment, he said nothing. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, sweat beading at his hairline. Finally, his words spilled out in a rush. "They left me no choice. Howard offered money, more than I've ever seen in my career, and Derek threatened me. He made it clear that if I didn't comply, things would get ugly. I couldn't risk it." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "You mean you couldn't risk them? But you risked Daniel's legacy. You risked me losing everything he trusted me with." Grant buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. "I know. I regret it every day, but once I was in, I couldn't back out. They had me cornered." Inside my purse, the small recorder captured every word. I stayed calm, careful not to let on, though my heart raced with the weight of his confession. When he finally looked up, his eyes were tired, pleading. "Please, Zara, you can't let them know I told you this. If Howard finds out..." "Howard won't find out from me," I said coldly, standing and slipping the will back into my bag. "But you've given me what I needed." I left him sitting there, broken and sweating in the booth, while I walked out into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of power in my chest. I had proof. Their lies were no longer shadows I couldn't grasp. They were caught, recorded, undeniable. As I gripped my bag, a new thought took root. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. And I was going to make them pay. I planned the dinner carefully, every detail chosen to disarm them. The invitation went out with a gentle tone, framed as an olive branch. I told Howard, Lydia, and Derek that I wanted to put aside the tension, that I was tired of the fighting and only wanted peace between us. They accepted without hesitation. Why wouldn't they? In their minds, I had already lost. That evening, I set the table with my best dishes, lit soft candles, and prepared a meal Daniel would have been proud of. I wanted the atmosphere to feel genuine, comforting, like I was truly giving up the fight. When they arrived, Lydia even hugged me, whispering how glad she was that I was finally being reasonable. Her words stung, but I kept my smile fixed. We sat down, and I poured the wine, keeping my movements graceful and calm. They ate and drank freely, their guard lowered more with every passing minute. I listened, nodding at their small talk, pretending to enjoy their stories. It didn't take long for Derek to slip into arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine like a man already celebrating victory. "You know, Zara," he said with a grin, "this really is for the best. Outsiders shouldn't control family assets. You wouldn't have known what to do with them anyway. The word outsider hit me like a slap, but I only laughed softly, as though I agreed. Maybe you're right, I said, keeping my tone light. It is a lot of responsibility. Howard joined in, his voice heavy with authority. Exactly. Daniel's legacy belongs to this family. You should be grateful we left you anything at all. Some women in your position get nothing. His tone carried no shame, only pride, as though he had done me a favor. I felt the anger rise inside me, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned forward, my smile polite, my hands steady. You're right, Howard. I should be thankful. Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. I set it on the table, sliding it across the polished wood until it rested in the center. Lydia glanced at it curiously. Derek raised an eyebrow, and Howard frowned. What's this? Derek asked, reaching for it. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, my smile never wavering. Daniel's original will, I said calmly. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Howard's face darkened, Lydia's hand froze midair, and Derek's smug grin faltered. I could see the panic flickering in their eyes, the realization that the control they thought they had was slipping away. I sat back, savoring the shift in power. All their gloating, their arrogance, it was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. And I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The moment the words left my mouth, the room erupted. Howard shoved back his chair, his voice booming across the table. This is nonsense. That paper doesn't mean anything. You think you can waltz in here and challenge this family? You're nothing without us. His face reddened with fury, his fists striking the table so hard the glasses rattled. Lydia, caught between fear and guilt, burst into tears. Zara, please, she pleaded, clutching at my sleeve. You don't understand. Howard only wanted to protect the family. We did what we thought was right. Can't you just let this go? Her voice cracked, but I could see it. She wasn't weeping for me, or even for Daniel. She was crying for herself, terrified of what was coming. Derek leaned forward, his grin gone, replaced with a sharp edge of anger. You have no proof this will is valid. And if you try to challenge us, I'll sue you into the ground. You won't have a penny left by the time I'm done. His words dripped with venom, but his eyes flickered with unease. I stayed calm, letting them rant and spit their threats. Then, without a word, I pulled a small recorder from my bag and set it on the table. With one click, Grant Holden's trembling voice filled the dining room. They left me no choice. Howard offered money, and Derek threatened me. I altered the documents. The will they read isn't the one Daniel signed. The sound was clear, undeniable. Howard's jaw clenched, Lydia sobbed harder, and Derek's face drained of color. For once, none of them had a clever retort. But I wasn't finished. At that moment, the front door opened and Caleb stepped inside, a folder tucked under his arm. He walked straight to me, ignoring the glares from the Millers, and placed the folder on the table. I thought you might need this, he said. I opened it and spread the contents before them. Bank statements, forged signatures, records of money funneled out of the company. Fraud, clear as day, all tied back to Howard and Derek. You've been bleeding Daniel's company dry, Caleb said flatly. And now, with the original will and Grant's confession, there's no hiding it. Howard tried to bluster, but the strength had left his voice. You can't prove. Yes, I can, I interrupted, my voice steady and strong. And I will. In court. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Lydia's quiet sobs. Derek's fists clenched, but he didn't speak. They all knew the truth. They were trapped. Every path they thought they controlled was closed. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not for me, but for themselves. I gathered the papers, the recorder, and the will, sliding them neatly back into my bag. This family tried to erase me, I said, rising from the table. But Daniel trusted me, and now the world will know the truth. They sat frozen, powerless, as I walked out. The courthouse felt colder than the storage unit, colder even than Howard's voice when he first dismissed me. Yet as I stepped inside, I carried warmth in my chest, the warmth of Daniel's trust, his words written in his hand, and the truth that no one could erase. Caleb walked beside me, the folder of evidence tucked under his arm. My lawyer carried the recorder with Grant Holden's confession. I carried Daniel's will. The trial unfolded over days, but it only took hours for the cracks in the Miller's story to show. Howard sat stiff in the witness chair, his voice booming with denial, but every piece of evidence chipped away at his lies. Derek tried to intimidate, his smug confidence unraveling with every document presented. Lydia wept openly, but even her tears could not wash away the fraud written in black and white. Grant Holden was called to the stand, and though his voice trembled, he repeated his confession under oath. The bribes, the threats, the altered papers, it all came out in plain view. There was no escape, no room for doubt. When the judge finally leaned forward to deliver the ruling, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The court recognizes the validity of Daniel Miller's original will. His estate, including the lake property and controlling company shares, is hereby granted to his widow, Zara Miller. Furthermore, the court finds substantial evidence of fraud, and charges will proceed against Howard Miller and Derek Miller. The words rang like a bell in my heart. Justice. Not just for me, but for Daniel, whose voice had been stolen. Howard slumped in his seat, his face drained of all authority. Derek cursed under his breath, his fists clenched, but he couldn't stop the bailiffs who closed in. Lydia sobbed quietly, her head bowed, powerless to change anything. The empire they thought they controlled had collapsed in front of everyone. I walked out of the courthouse not as the widow they tried to silence, but as the rightful heir Daniel had trusted me to be. The lake house was mine, the shares were mine, and for the first time since his death, I had full independence. No more allowances. No more being told what I could or couldn't handle. I had everything Daniel wanted me to have. Days later, I stood before his grave, the wind rustling through the trees by the cemetery. I traced my fingers across his name, whispering the words I had carried in my heart since finding the will. I kept your legacy safe. They can't touch me now. For a moment, I thought I could feel him there with me, proud, at peace. As I walked away, the Millers' downfall lingered like a shadow behind me, but it no longer mattered. They were ruined, broken by their own greed. I, on the other hand, was stronger than ever, untouchable. Do you believe Zara was right to fight for Daniel's legacy, or should she have let the Millers keep control and walked away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear them. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one.